Yeah, I don't want to.
So, not don't use the There's a couple of seats up here if you want to know. Welcome, everyone. Hopefully that's unmuted, George. So welcome everyone to tonight's seminar. My name's Ari. I'm, as Melanie said, the Society of Construction Law's immediate past president still, but also more importantly tonight, I'm the director here with Sam and our host at Reflective Construction Law for tonight's presentation. I have to say thank you to Reflective Construction Law and Sam McCutcheon, who's organised the live stream. Actually, George did most of the organising of the live stream, so thank you, George. And welcome to everyone joining us online as well tonight. Look, while I'm doing the introduction, if you can wave, and online people can just put a comment for George if you can't hear it, and we'll figure out the volume, and please keep your microphones muted. I'm fairly certain we've set it up so you can't unmute yourself, but yeah, just keep that in mind. If you do have questions on the way through, George can monitor the questions online as well, and I'm not sure if you guys want discussion on the way through or questions at the end, but we'll make that work. I do have a couple of one notice to give before we get into tonight. So the Society of Construction Law's AGM and annual dinner is in Christchurch this year on the 25th of June. The dinner speaker is Tony Sewell, and dinner is going to be at the Botanic, which is the private function space attached to Hugo Restaurant. If you are able to come, that'd be fantastic, and it'll be a great evening. Christchurch at the moment has a lot of new things opening, and it's quite a cool place to be. So if anyone does want to travel there, do that. There was the official notice last week, and there'll be more information soon. There are also 2 positions on council with nominations closing next Tuesday, 2nd of June. So if you'd like to put your name forward, get in touch with our manager, Melanie. Then the second notice, there's a construction case law update in June. I think I saw an email asking for suggestions come out today. So if you've got ideas on that to do or want to present, please let Melanie know. Now to this evening, it's great to have Mike Hanson and David Wilkie here to talk to us tonight, willing to share their knowledge and expertise discussing tailoring or tampering, the hidden costs of special conditions in construction. I'm really looking forward to this topic tonight. I was talking to Mike earlier. The first time I met Mike was about probably 14 years ago after Mainsley went bust, and we had a number of discussions on how how certain contracts could be done, and I like to think we did that quite simply, Mike, and it worked. But yeah, look, I think this is a discussion we need to have more of in the industry, and it's close to everyone's hearts in this room. This presentation last night in Christchurch, which went very well, and they present in Auckland shortly, so that it's very very topical for them. Just quickly, Mike Hanson is a technical director at RDT Pacific with over 40 years experience in contract administration and project delivery, been involved in a number of high-profile projects, as a member of NZIQS and this, I'll call it SCIP, but the Society of Construction Contract Practitioners, which everyone in the room is hopefully aware of or a member of. And Mike was the winner of the Outstanding Leadership Award at the 2024 Property Council Auckland Property People Awards. David Wilkie will be known to many people as a construction industry practitioner with extensive experience dealing in major complex projects across New Zealand and Australia, roles on landmark developments such as NZICC, Auckland City Hospital, Auckland Airport expansions, and the Downtown Auckland Precinct. Relevant for tonight, David chaired the 2023 review committees for 3910, 3916 and 3917, is still active in the industry, was at TSA and predecessor firms for a number of years, but as he was telling me earlier, is now, I won't say a man of free leisure, but
late career break.
Has a late career break and is doing some quite exciting things. So anyway, we're delighted to welcome Mike and David. I'll hand over to you guys.
Thank you very much, Harry.
Hi, everybody. As Ari said, I'm having a late career break. I'm not retired. I'm just enjoying having a moment between. I never had a mid-career break, so this is my opportunity to have a bit of time. And I'm delighted to be here. Thanks for coming out on a Wednesday. It's 25 odd people sitting here to talk about special conditions of contract. What a topic, and many online. I'm pleased at least if I've got good company with tragic company, if that's what it is. So Mike and I are going to sort of talk through the tailoring or tampering the hidden cost of special conditions. And we're going to start by talking a bit about the context for why this is important. We're going to talk about the productivity equation. How does construction stand up as a productive sector, and why is this relevant to that conversation? Well, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the 3910 committee and how it actually works, because I think that's highly relevant to the adoption of 3910 2023 and 3916 and 3917. Then I'm going to sit down. Then Mike's going to talk about some examples of tailoring or tampering, and we're not going to offer a view on that, but you might form a view on some of those items. And then we're going to have a talk about, well, so what, and what do we do about it? Questions at the end. Happy to have questions on the way too, but we'll see how we go. So context. Firstly, the highly relevant couple of pieces of information. 96% of construction contracts in New Zealand are under 50 million and 98% are under 100 million. That's relevant. So a lot of the people in this room has probably had a lot of experience at the top end of town, which is the other 2%. It's also, from a tendering perspective, the largest concentration of tenders in New Zealand through government tenders are at less than 5 million. So the majority of contracts are in the small to medium range. Why is that relevant? Well, it's relevant because we have standard contracts. And standard contracts are designed not for the top end of town. They're designed for contracts that are used. They're supposed to be relevant for most projects most of the time. Now, I think that's one of the points I've got there. But they're certainly prepared by industry for industry. They're extensively reviewed. And I'm going to talk a bit about the process that we went through to rewrite 2023 3910. But there are some key characteristics of that extensive process which are highly relevant, which is that they establish that have highly established communities of practice and understanding of what contracts mean. 3910 accounts for 80% of the contracts in New Zealand. So there's a language, there's a body of knowledge, there's an expectation and familiarity that the industry has built up, which is highly relevant to their use. I know that there are some other excellent forms of contract that aren't New Zealand standards. So I'm thinking NEC, JCT, FIDIC. The reason I think they struggle to get traction in New Zealand is precisely because there's not that language. People don't understand how to use it. There's not that body of knowledge and expertise and how to use those contracts. So there's a natural resistance to do something new. Really important, standard forms of contract are imminently insurable. The market is set up. The insurance industry have set up products that are tailored to suit standard contracts. You don't need to ask for particulars if it's a 3910 standard contract. So there's product available. And I'd say, I mean, you can probably argue the toss on these things, but they're cost effective. They're generally accepted as balanced and fair. And I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. So I want to talk a bit too about, okay, so you've got standard contracts, but as we all know, they're heavily specialed these days. And I want to talk about where those specials came from. The research that I've done is that 40 years ago, the standard contracts weren't generally modified. And Mike's got some great examples to a great example of that. So Michael.
Yeah, I'm old enough to have been around in the late 80s. One of the first big projects I worked on was Te Papa. So the design was being done in Auckland with Jazz Mix and was Ivan Mersip and Pete Bosley and John Sutherland. John was a specification guy. And what we decided to do was adopt the UK Common Arrangement of Work section system, which meant all the information had to be captured in one place, which was the specification. And we had a traditional bill of quantities and we had the drawings. So everything had to be cross-referenced back. Result of that was I spent a lot of time working with John. Eventually, we got to the end of it and I was a bit concerned about some of the linking of how to deal with provisional sums and P&G adjustments that I didn't believe were quite sort of clear as I would like them to be, because we decided to adopt the 1987 version of 3910. So I said to John, how do I go about putting in a special condition? And he just stared at me in disbelief and said, that's subterfuge. He said, you cannot do that. I said, yeah, but I have to. So in the end, he said, well, go and see Graham Shadwell. Graham was the project director, ex-Ministry of Works, I guess. And Graham said, okay, well, I can understand what you're trying to do. Go and see Carol Durbin from Simpson Grierson, and if she's happy, I'll be happy. So off I went and sat down and explained it to Carol. And then we looked at each other. I was expecting her to write it. She said, I'm your legal draftsman. You write it, and I'll tell you if it doesn't clash with anything, and I'll clear it up. And then she did a bit of that, signed it, said, there you go, on your way. But you contrast that situation to what's happening today.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I guess that the key thing here is subterfuge. It was not normal to change standard forms of contract. And you contrast that to today. And I think that where this has come from is that certainly in the late 80s, early 90s, we adopted a lot of special conditions from Australia. And how do they come about? They came about on large infrastructure transactions, PPPs, different delivery models. And contracts were written for that, and they got adopted over here. And then we had people who'd been working in the Middle East or in the UK on oil and gas projects, and they've got some awesome clauses over there, and you come back and work in New Zealand and say, well, I reckon we can shoehorn that into a standard agreement. And so it compounds, and that's the way that specials became part of the normal vernacular of our contracting methods. Are they relevant to the way that we contract? Well, I think if you'd say 96% of our contracts are under 50 million and the large majority of those tendered work is under 5, I'd say no, they're not. And that's, I guess, a provocation that we'll talk a bit more about. But then, the principals, given the opportunity to transfer risk, they're going to say, yes, please. And why wouldn't they? And we'll talk a bit more about why wouldn't they in a minute. And if, you know, the legal profession will generally, were highly respected for good reason, and it's a brave principle that will go against legal advice. And every board in the world that I know will agree with legal advice, or they'll take the legal advice. Actually, I'm just going to stop there for a minute and just poll the room. How many principals have we got in the room? People who would classify themselves as a buyer of construction? Handful, okay. How many people would consider themselves authors of contracts, involved in the compilation, composition, and authoring of contracts? I know there's a few more than that. You come on, be honest here. So, and how many from the legal profession? Okay. So on the delivery side, so not dealing with so much the pre-contract award, but the post-contract award, what's the mixture here? I've got a few contractors. Yep, dealing with the administration side. Great, thank you. And so there's a bit of a mix. So we've got the people who are buying it, people that are helping the people that are buying it to write contracts, people that are properly involved in the negotiation, and then the people that are dealing with the downstream effects of some of those contracts. That's exactly what we want. Thank you. Another one of the principles perspectives is, well, if you don't like it, you don't have to sign it. And whilst that is true, I think there's a broader conversation around that which we could have. I think from a contractor's perspective, and I speak to a lot of contractors and principals, I think I'm generalising, but at the top end of town, the first point is not relevant. But I think for the majority of small to medium-sized contractors, they don't understand the intricacies of bespoke contracting, so they're rolling the dice when they sign an agreement. On the whole, they don't have time intended to do full reviews and understand what those implications are. As a consequence of heavily modified contracts, there's sort of this development and growth of mistrust of contracts and the people that write them. But they do price it. There are opportunities to price these things, but whilst trying to maintain a competitive overlay. And they pass through risk to their subcontractors, and they pass through prices from their subcontractors, which there's often it's a bit invisible to the purchaser, the principal, quite what that looks like. So my provocation to you is that contract authors have become, and I'm not picking on lawyers here, I'm really not, because it's not just lawyers that write contracts, and principals have a very important part to play in this, but contract authors have become incredibly sophisticated at transferring risk, but as an industry, we're really ineffective at managing it. And that is manifest both through a large amount of special conditions. There's high cost, lower productivity, complexities become normalised. We often write things we actually don't know how to manage, or the person who writes it might know how to manage it, but the person who's managing it doesn't know how to manage it, and that results in downstream costs and impacts. And the uncomfortable reality of this is that there's a big disconnect between the people that are writing this and the people that are dealing with it, and that's a challenge for the industry. So I want to go back and talk about 3910. As Ari, thanks for the introduction, very generous. I was privileged to be the chair of the committee that rewrote the 2023 version of 3910. And I'm sure you're familiar, but with the history, but 3910 originally started in the 60s, I think, as a document called 623. It was first issued in 1987. Couple of revisions, and then the 2023 revision. The review was driven by industry, and the principal reasons for that were concern about the role of the engineer and the mistrust that was consequential as a result of that role. I'm not going to talk about that because we've addressed that in 2023, but it's a fascinating topic.
Sorry, how did you say you've addressed it?
We have addressed it.
I don't know how.
Oh, well,
You broke it in two, but you haven't addressed the role.
oh, that's not for this conversation, but yeah. Well, I'll be very happy to talk to you about that afterwards. The other reason for doing the review was just this burgeoning number of special conditions that were being introduced into and it was there's lots of good reports, including this one, which is from the construction sector accord about the use of special conditions in the public sector and how common they were. Pretty pleased that Carl Jackson, who authored a large part of this, is here tonight. I think one of the interesting things about that is that, I think it's in the report, it identifies that the industries, the public sector purchasers of construction who used the least number of specials were those who were purchasing the most. So they were the more sophisticated and mature. Those who didn't buy often were loading it up with specials. They didn't understand what they were doing. You didn't say that, but that's my interpretation of it. So the other was its industry desire for collaboration, bringing change to legislative, bring it in line with legislative change, and it's been time since over 10 years. So there were 24 people on the review committee, big committee. I know there's only 12 on that picture. The rest of them weren't quite there. That was a celebration dinner we had at the end. But there were nine lawyers or legal professionals involved in that review, representing various industry bodies. Good selection of public and private sector clients, contractors and subcontractors, horizontal and vertical, consultants, designers, project managers, QSs, and a few others from government and academia. So I would say that that was a proxy for the sector. It was a very engaged group of 24 people who, it's my guess, you know, that it was about 6,000 hours of committee time spent on that. Nobody's paid. And our measures, what we were looking to achieve was, you know, we wanted a document that's appropriate for use most of the time, in most situations, transparent and clear, an evolution rather than a revolution of the current document. Because of that, we wanted people to be familiar. We didn't want to upset that body of knowledge that had been generated and grown over the years. 5 years dominant, well, time will tell on that one. Simple navigations and consistent and plain language. This is an interesting one. So how we made decisions. One of the first things that we did as a committee is we gathered together all of the special conditions that were pretty much everything that we could lay our hands on from around the industry. And we did a critical review of those and assessed, you know, well, how do they relate to a special? Should they be included in a special? And that was so pretty much every special that you've seen written or in a contract had significant debate at the committee level. It wasn't that things were overlooked. We spent hours talking about concurrent delay, limits of liability, time bars, you know, reciprocal obligations. There was a lot. We just went deep on it all. And it was important that we went deep on that, because if we're going to be recommending as proxies of the sector that this is a fair and balanced standard, we had to go there, and we did. Probably the most important rule that we had as a committee, and it sounds like it could be used the wrong way, but it wasn't, was that if we couldn't agree a change, then the default position was that we would use the existing standard. And you might think, well, a lazy committee will just keep going back and no change. But the committee was very motivated. And this was a very highly motivating statement, because there was a lot of debate, different perspectives and points of view. Our job as a committee was not just to advocate for a position, but to actually find an agreement for the industry. Nobody wanted, if we were having a strong debate about something, it was because we didn't like what was in the standard. So we always found an agreement, a level of agreement, because nobody wanted to go back to what was the original. So I don't know if I've explained that very well, but it was a very strong motivating force for the committee for change. Okay, so the 2023 version was issued in December 2023, published in 2023. A recent, I think, the Russell McVeigh's report survey from earlier this year identified that it's not really getting a lot of use. 40% of the industry is picking it up. The reasons for that, well, one of the most interesting and frankly concerning reasons is that the cost and time, there's the yellow box there, the cost and time associated with updating the standard to incorporate our old specials was too great. Pardon? The industry went to great length looking at the industry spectrum of specials and adopted what the industry considers to be a fair and balanced apportionment or contract, which addresses those specials. And now the industry wants to go back and rewrite them so that we don't want change. Is that what you're saying? We don't want to adopt change.
That's what we're seeing. We're not seeing change, and we're seeing
all the
we're
time.
seeing your sector, the project manager sector, are looking to reintroduce the clauses for being able to have lower down below the CA, all those things which are important.
We see it a lot.
A lot of that, all those delegations coming back in. So it's the procurement side, the lawyers on the procurement side, and the project management industry on the procurement side are all driving it, not changing.
Which is why we're here to talk about it now, because it's a significant concern. We don't think it's responsible. We don't think it's warranted. When I say we, I'm talking me really. This was not a trivial exercise to rewrite the standard, and I know that I've heard people say, "Oh, if it got too hard, you just didn't go there." Well, no, that's absolutely not the case. If it got too hard, we had a thorough debate and we agreed as a committee, and it was every decision that we made was unanimous. There's only one thing that I'm disappointed that we didn't get in there, and it was a definition of concurrent delay. Mike's going to talk about that, but there is reasons for that as well. So once again, the Russell McVeigh survey talked about, so what do you see as the most common cause of disputes? Unclear contract ambiguities. If we didn't change contracts, they would be less ambiguous, which would reduce disputes. Similarly, issues that likely to lack of clear contract terms is 20% of the reason that we go to formal disputes in the first place. Once again, if we didn't keep changing our contracts, we would see less disputes. That's the hypothesis. So why do we care about this? Why should we care about construction contracts? Well, it's because construction contracts are a very important productivity tool. And just a few stats here. So construction spend in New Zealand is about 30 billion, or it's about 7% of GDP. Now that as a productivity measure, so effort to put work in place, it hasn't changed since the 70s. I think we've had about a 1% improvement over that period, which is 50 years coming up to. And whilst the balance of the economy has improved by about 2.8%, and manufacturing is 3.6%. So construction as a sector is an absolute laggard. And if it's any consolation, and it shouldn't be, that's a global phenomenon. That's not a New Zealand phenomenon. So we should be doing things to improve productivity. There's a great report written by McKinsey Global, who published their report in 2017, which talks about the global challenge of construction productivity and calculates that the lost opportunity from 2017 is 1.6 trillion. I mean, that's a big number. I'll put it there because it's a big number. But why do we care? Because improving construction productivity improves getting bang for buck for our taxpayer funds fundamentally. I really like this model, which is a bit different probably to the QSs in the room, what they were trained in, but construction cost is effectively 4 components. There's labour, there's plant and materials, there's P&G and margin, and then there's risk and waste. And people who are smarter on this than me say that that's about 25% each. So that if we focus on the risk and waste component, there's 25% of cost savings to be had in there. So that's not doing things twice. It's not pricing in risk. It's managing our supply chains efficiently and effectively and not throwing unproductive money down the tubes. And our view is that special conditions are unproductive money wasted because they attract a premium and they cause waste throughout the delivery. The snip on the side is from that McKinsey report, which talks about the 7 elements for improving construction productivity. you can read those, but regulation, collaboration and contracting, design and engineering, procurement and supply chain management and on-site execution, those are all heavily impacted by special conditions. So special conditions have a role in reducing costs and all those things. So I think, and most people think about construction productivity as saying, let's get robots. No. I think construction productivity, the low-hanging fruit here is reducing our risk premium and our execution costs, which we can do a lot through the use of or non-use of special conditions. So so where is that cost? So there's a cost to prepare them. I'm not going to hazard a guess at what that is, but I'd say it's material. There's a cost at tender, and I've done a bit of research on this, and I've spoken to contractors about what does it actually cost to look at a heavy set of special conditions. And I think it's between 1 to 3% at main contract level. There's actually quite a significant cost which is hidden often at subcontract level, which is if the contract is passing through those heavy risk obligations to the subcontractor, and that has a few effects. One of the really material ones is it reduces competition in the subcontract market. So if the principal is asking for a 5% bond, cash bond, the main contractor will ask their major subcontractors for at least a 5% bond, and if they're doing that, if there's a dozen potential subcontractors, you've just reduced that to 3, because there's only 3 that could actually produce a bond. So you've got a premium as a result of reduced competition, and the 5% will also be priced at probably around about 12%. So there's a premium associated with that right away. So that subcontract tender premium as a consequence of special conditions is quite material, hidden for largely. There's a cost to negotiate and execute. I'm sure you've sat in meetings, principal, contractor, project manager, legal representation from every party, debating terms. That's pricey, it's expensive. There's a cost to administer it. And I think that's about 1% alone. So that if you've got man-marking going on across the industry to make sure you meet your time bars and make sure that you're claiming everything you should, and then batting it back in IC's roles and CA's roles and QS roles, that's a material cost. And there's a cost when you hit disputes as well. So I think we've talked about that. We'll just have a quick look at that. So what are the other things that really introduce cost at main contractor level? Program and performance remedies, time bars in particular, fitness for purpose and good industry practice obligations above the standard, extensive design obligations, health and safety obligations beyond the legislative requirements, reporting requirements, separate contractor performance risks, all sorts of stuff which are pretty common that you see in specials, which are just transferring risk. Talked a bit about, talked a bit about the secondary procurement cost premium at sub-trade level. We talked about that. So what is the cost of special conditions? Well, I don't know. I really don't know. But if you're talking about a $30 billion industry sector per annum in New Zealand, wouldn't it be hard to easily identify that there's $1 billion of cost there? Now, is that all waste? No, of course it's not. Is that all available for saving? No, I don't think it is, because there is definitely a role for special conditions and for buying risk transfer. But I would posit that there's a hospital's worth of savings that could be found every year in the New Zealand construction sector through more judicious and careful use of special conditions. Can I prove that? No, I can't. But that's my view. Mike, over to you. Okay.
Yeah. So the first one, I think, is some special conditions which I think facilitate good contract admin. The first one is contractor design, submission and review process. Well, 3910 is a construction-only contract, but there's so much contractor design work going on that really complicates the whole process. And the good thing about the 2023 version, contract administrators are now obliged to bring it up front and declare it in the schedule 1, because it affects shock drawing timing, program, building consent, if you're measuring a bill of quantities off quantities that could change, and also for insurance purposes. So they could have gone a little bit further, I believe, and put the submission and review process in there, because it can be quite significant. Definition of good trade practice could be useful. I had an instance a few weeks ago where contractor put a butt joint in a span drawer waterproofing thing, and the architect wasn't happy from aesthetic reasons and could have fitted in a sheet without any butt joints. It's got it sorted, but I felt that a definition of good trade practice might have just helped me a bit there. Obviously, time buys when genuinely needed. Might be tenants working under a developer and they've got simply timeframes are important, got to finish a shopping centre before Christmas or whatever. We touched on concurrent delay clauses. No, there isn't a concurrent delay clause. And if that's the case, common law comes in, and there's a very good reference work. The UK Society of Construction Law called Delay and Disruption. Superb reference document. I see it's even being referenced in adjudications and legal advice these days. Trouble is, without anything in there, we're seeing different special conditions coming in. Or, one will describe a Mason approach, one will be a dominant clause, thing, and another one will be apportionment. So I went around the office and found 4. So it's very difficult for us as contract administrators to get all these different versions in the system.
So you're saying if there's no concurrent delay clause, you apply some.
Yeah, well, it implies common law, and
so you apply a clause into the contract if there's no.
No. Well, we just follow the delay and disruption protocol, and it walks you through that process.
That you will.
Yeah.
Protocol.
Our problem is that we get all these special conditions, all slightly different, coming in. So it would have been advantageous if everybody had agreed on one. I think the Mason approach, correct me if I'm wrong, is the generally accepted approach these days.
If you presume it applies to an unamended contract.
Yeah.
Would you be correct?
Yeah. Inclement weather definition obviously depends on the contract, that it's a fit out or not. So that's often expanded to link it to a weather station, or sometimes a contractor will declare the number of days that they've allowed. That's sort of becoming quite common. Obviously, contractors take the cost risk and the client takes the time risk. So contractors preferably would like to keep working because they don't get paid. The next one was, we're only just starting to see the 2023 version in the office, probably less than 5% of our projects. This worried me a little bit. I got the impression that the contract administrator could come to an agreement on an extension of time without following the same rules as the IC's list. So if that's the case, I would definitely try and sort that one out. Top right-hand, variations in cost, removal of variation processing fee. Well, I just never seen a template ever accommodating that particular clause, so you might as well go. I think the fact that contractors have quantity surveyors doing that sort of work and it's built in probably isn't needed. On-site overheads and actual variation costs for on-site overheads. The percentage, there's 4 different percentages. One is attended, one reasonable, one or in the document, and you choose one of them. But if you take an example of, say, a facade that's changed in colour from green to blue right at the beginning of the job and it costs $200,000, contractor will get a percentage of that amount of money if nothing's really happened. On the other hand, if the painting of the external work had been finished and the scaffolding's gone and the principal wanted to change the colour and the scaffolding had to come back, that percentage is irrelevant again. So why not just do the actual costs? And that's probably the same issue I had in 1987, actually. The next one is final account agreed within 3 months after PC. At the moment, the unaltered, this is the old 2013, allows 1 month after defects notification, which is 13 months, which is simply too long. I was talking to somebody from Naylor Love the other day, and it's part of their KPIs and their QSs to get it agreed within 3 months. Same thing with Argon Construction. And of course, clients want that resolved as soon as possible as well. So I do notice in the 2023 version, there's a interim final account and the default position is 3 months. So they must be sort of following the usual practice. Process, confidentiality clauses. We were working on a theatre the other day, and client was still fundraising, and the contractor had some adjacent spaces, commercial spaces, and they were looking for tenants. So both of them were taking parties through the building, much to the annoyance of the client. There was a confidentiality clause, pointed it out to the contractor, and they worked together to sort of sort the site visits out. People, key contractors, personnel identified, that's quite useful. ETC rep clauses engaged before ETC appointed. This is the 2013 version. We sometimes get a client appointing an engineer's rep before the engineer themselves has been appointed. And that's totally against 2013. The engineer is supposed to appoint the rep and is responsible for the smooth running of the job. That's fine, you know, but what amazes me is nobody changes the contract to reflect that. It's still left as it was, and that's just not the case. So those are some sort of special conditions that can facilitate. Good. I probably don't need to go through that slide. I think we covered it.
Okay.
Contract administration, the risks. Special conditions complicate administration. They're a significant source of disputes. There's a disconnected drafting. Those administering the contract were often not involved in writing it. Disconnected handover, limited knowledge transfer from procurement into delivery, and this lack of continuity amplifies the interpretive complexity special conditions create. So I'll just give a couple of, so this is 2023 version, and this job came into our office about 2 weeks ago. So the author here has changed where the contractor considers any matter which is not described in line and should be treated as a variation to if this contract treats or deems a matter. So you need a lawyer to sort of explain what that really means, you know. Contractors no entitlement to claim for payment has been changed to no payment otherwise due has been changed to contractor no entitlement. The words on an ongoing basis have been added to health and safety. Why? And the last one intrigues me as well. So the word treated as a variation has been changed to valued as a variation. Well, that seems to be taking the time component out of the variation equation. You might have a situation where a builder's trying to finish a job to get PC, puts in a cheap form of skirting to get across the line. You can value it as a variation, it's cheaper, but that time could be taken into account because had they put the proper one in, they might have been late. So I can't understand why the author's done that.
But what remains? The time out staying in place.
Sorry?
They're saying that the work is going to stay in place, so there is no extra time.
Yeah, no, there won't be any extra time, but there might be an argument to reduce the time or, you know, if there's an extension of time going on. So why do that, you know?
Because my view on that's a good example of risk transfer, and it's unnecessary. It's a bit duplicitous, dishonest, and it builds mistrust.
So this is another one, undermining fair risk allocation. So this is another recent job. So this was only a little fit out. So this clause has been put in. If a clash is identified, the contract is expected to allow for the most expensive requirement. Principal is not responsible for accuracy or completeness of site information. Contractor deemed to have carried out all additional investigations, which is really 3 weeks to tender a job to try to get into that sort of detail. They're just taking it. It's just unfair. Sometimes you get clauses like this. Now, this is another recent job. This clause has been amended to take out or as soon as practical, and a later clause makes this a condition precedent to entitlement, this notice. On the other hand, the engineer's time has been increased from 20 to 30 working days, and as soon as practical has been left in. Now, any decent engineers working under this scenario, this is 2023 and 2013, have to perform their roles and functions under the contract without delay. Case of the old 2013 without undue delay. So what made this project even worse was only 4 months long. So, and we queried it, but we just didn't have, the delivery manager didn't care because somebody had signed it off and we couldn't get to the source of it in time. So we had to put up with it. This one is, yeah, this is a 2013 job. The engineer is actually the principal, and we're sort of an advisory sort of role. So 922 has been deleted, and that information's been put into 923. I guess the author might have been trying to emphasize the fact that it was a 15 working days and it's a condition precedent. So the issue was this notice was given 5 months later. So the engineer had asked, should they throw it out? And we had a look at the original instruction. It was in writing, but it didn't actually say variation, but it was quite clearly a variation. It was an answer to design clarity, something about a conduit and a slab to go underneath it. But what was interesting, now that it's all been jumbled up with all these ors, how do you read this? Where the contractor considers any matter which is not described in clause 9.1. Well, it is described in clause 9.1. So then do you stop reading and say, well, the contractor didn't need to issue a notice at all? It's not and or. It's not or. It's not and. It's or. So anyway, our advice was we didn't think it was fair. We didn't believe the contractor needed to the way that's written, and it was obviously a variation in the first place. But this one, it's about 5 years old. It was a COVID clause. The engineer rep was a member of the client's organisation. I was an independent ETC. I read through that clause and I couldn't understand it. So I asked for an interpretation from the author and I put it to one side. Eventually it manifested itself into a $1.5 million claim. So I asked for the contractor's interpretation. It was completely different. So I called a meeting and the client arrived with 2 lawyers. The contractor also arrived with 2 lawyers, and I also had a lawyer to advise me on the legal aspects. That meeting took about 3 hours, probably cost between $10,000 and $15,000. And I went away and made a decision. But this is just an example of the complexity that can happen. This is a job that's just come in 2023. Approximately 60 new clauses added and approximately 110 clauses amended. Very few project-specific changes. This is a bit about international standard form approaches. This is the Federation of Consulting Engineers. It's the most commonly used standard form in the world, but it's not commonly used in New Zealand. It has various project delivery methods. I don't know if you've seen, it's got different coloured books representing different project delivery models. It's also, the engineer is also called the engineer, wears 2 hats, and I think it started in about 1913. This one, JCT contracts, also similar to the 2013 version. Contract administrator is called a contract administrator or an architect. I think this started in about 1930, I think. The NEC suite was developed after the Latham report in 1994. It's a very different, so very proactive contract administration, requires all parties to engage in the admin process, also offers different project delivery models, and the contract administrator is called a project manager. This has been used in New Zealand, I think down in the South Island, quite a bit, probably after the earthquake. Be interesting to know if anybody has had an experience of it, because I'd love to read any case studies. Then the one on the right, the Australian 4000, that was recently updated in 2025, and they're working on a design and construct. It's also similar to 2013, engineers called a superintendent, and wears two hats as well. Yeah, this is quite interesting. So the FIDIC have, you want to carry on with this?
Yeah, oh, well, yeah, sure. This is so one of the rules with using FIDIC, I'm not a FIDIC expert, I don't know much about it, but I really like this. They have this principle of saying that if you're going to use a FIDIC form of contract, yes, you can special it, but you need to observe these, for it to be called a FIDIC contract, you need to observe their golden rules. And their golden rules are, the things must be generally as implied in the general conditions. They must be clear and unambiguous. No change in balance and risk and reward is a fundamental thing for me. Time periods must be of reasonable duration, and the last one is it's a provisionally binding decision, condition precedent to arbitration. So you've got to make decisions before you jump off to arbitration. I really like the idea of having golden principles for standard contracts, because we are getting so much modification of standard contracts these days. I think if you cross a threshold of too much modification, you shouldn't be able to say you're using a standard anymore. And I think that's what these are really good in that regard. I think, generally, international standard contracts do discourage extensive specialing, and we haven't really done that in New Zealand yet. So what are the solutions? I think we want to talk a little bit about, well, before we talk about the solutions, I think there is definitely a role here for the principals as to take some responsibility. And as we talked about before, if a principal is offered an opportunity to transfer risk, they're going to say yes, please, almost all the time. But before they do that, are they as fully informed as they should be about the cost premium for making that decision and the productivity impact long term? And they may not care about that if they're buying a one-off. They may be very happy to transfer that. If they are a regular buyer of construction, an investor in construction, they should care about, if they have a pipeline, they should care about the productivity equation and the cost of their contracts. So, yeah, I'm not asking you to answer it here, but, I think it's a posed question. So what is the contract author's role in informing their clients about these questions? So public sector construction accounts for about 20%. So it's about 12 billion per year in New Zealand. So as a spender of the public purse, I think the obligations on our public sector to use standard forms of contract and reduce the amount of specials is a fiscally prudent thing for them to do. It's also prudent because you're looking after the long-term health of the sector, and the sector is critical to our ongoing economic development. We don't develop without infrastructure, and you don't get good infrastructure without a construction sector. So I challenge the public sector to work hard to reduce the number of specials they put in their contracts. And
sorry, just go out. So where is that survey from? The information on that survey?
Well, this comes from the construction sector record. We can reference this.
The actual extracts from the record.
I mean, I'm talking bluntly, they're lies. Literally lies, just flat out. I mean, unless you're dealing with NZTA, they heavily amend all their contracts. I mean, those.
Well, I think that's just the same, that they are amending them.
Yeah, I know, but it says that they tend to have fewer special conditions and more reasonable allocation of risk. It's just.
No, that's so the construction sector record report says that the organisations that are buying most construction special less than the ones
that's just.
That's okay. Well, you might want to take that up with the people that wrote that report.
It still exists.
Yeah.
Let's have a chat afterwards. I mean, so it was a narrow scope of review. It was about 8 to 10 government agencies. I can't remember exactly, and I can't remember exactly which the agencies were because
you'll see them on the next slide.
2021, I did it. But yeah, it wasn't exclusively the statement that all agencies buying the most had fewer. That was the trend that was observed, that those that tended to buy more had less.
I'm not sure it's lies. I think it's possibly certainly perspective. I'm stuck. It's not moving on. Can you just move us on there? So one of the interesting things that came out of the construction sector accord was exactly what I'm talking about, was that the public sector saying we need to be better about not doing things, reinventing our own special conditions by agency every single time. This is a snapshot from a status report which talked about some of the key agencies that were buying a lot of construction and their commitment and obligation to improve. And I've put up there not to discuss it or debate it, but the key thing is there was strong alignment around this and pushing towards an all-green situation where they were committed to using less specials and procuring more effectively. That's all stopped. And unfortunately, the construction sector accord initiatives don't really have an owner and a champion anymore. Tawahanga, maybe that could be a potential home for that. They don't really see that as their role. Construction, the Crown Infrastructure Delivery, is it CID? Maybe that's a good place for that to reside, but at the moment that there is no home for this, which I think is a gap. It's a strong initiative that has fallen into a hole. So I want to start by saying I think there's a significant onus on the public sector purchases of construction to special less fundamentally and to think hard about when they special their contracts. I think there's also a significant obligation on contract authors, and I would suggest that they need to clarify the brief before you just launch into this is what we always did. Critically evaluate suite of specials. So are they really relevant to the scope and scale of the project and the project specific risks? And I think there's a suggestion at the end about restructuring contracts to make it more readable and manageable. Now, really interestingly, 2023 version of 3910 was, we issued this in an editable Word form. Well, and a lot of people who write contracts, look, this is great. I can really go to town on it now. But the reason we did that was not for the convenience of the people who write contracts. It was for the convenience of the people who receive those contracts so they can get a conformed version and you can understand it. So rather than the old parlance, you'd say, there's special conditions, so delete these words after the comma and add in this bit, and then 3 sections later add in this little bit. You're trying to understand what the hell that meant. This was a way to sort of to get around that. It wasn't to make it easier to special. This is a real example. You can't really read that there, but it's from 2023 version of a special contract that I've seen. So 513 says, which is program updates, that the program should be updated at the frequency noted in the first schedule. So this person specialed this to say monthly. So they added that into the general conditions, which you think, well, then you then need to update the specials, wouldn't you, have to do the first schedule to recognise that, but they didn't. They added some vague reference about to be reviewed weekly. So that's a bit of red that is completely unnecessary because they just could have written monthly in the first schedule. And that's a bad example of tampering, I'd say. And that's not tailoring, that's just poor drafting. So it's not for your benefit, contract authors, it's for the benefit of the people that are receiving it. One of the things I think that I'm encouraging contract authors to do is to avoid smushing in P&G into your specials. I think it's way better to structure your contract documents so that rather than saying, I want you to produce a monthly report in this format and put that in the special conditions, or this is your RFI process, or you need to allow for attending these PCG meetings and these are the roles that you need to provide for the contract. That shouldn't sit in your special conditions. I think the way I like this model, which is that you have the general conditions, the special conditions that are the real legals and the schedules. Then you have a project requirements document, which talks about what's important to the client. So this could include their policies, their resource consent, their site conditions, behaviours, noise, vibration, stuff like that. Things that are really important for the client. Then separately, there's a delivery manual which talks about how we want you to do it. And that's where you put in your monthly reporting requirements and formats and RFI processes and attendees at meetings and site-specific roles and that stuff. And if you're sticking it in there, it's still order of precedence, which is now in 3910, it's still prominent. It's high on the schedule, but it's not cluttering up your specials. and it's much easier to read as a person who's trying to interpret and manage and deliver the work. It's easier to read in this format. So we've got a few points about think before you edit and a few ideas here. So when should you introduce special conditions? And I think you introduce specials when there are project characteristics, which means there are specifically identified risks that aren't anticipated by the standard. That's a good time to put in specials. When there's regulatory statutory obligations or requirements of the principle, add a special if they're not covered by the standards already. Where you've got an extended or integrated procurement process, and I'm thinking particularly, but not exclusively here, of ECI processes. I think ECI processes raise the reasonably foreseeable level. I think that should be reflected as a special where you've got an ECI process. Where the contract of size and value or complexity warrants it. So if you're at the top end of town, you're talking about sophisticated parties negotiating an agreement, it's reasonable to expect a few more specials, and they might be in the nature of securities or liabilities or warranties or whatever, which is the next point where you've got sophisticated buyer and seller. Well, you've got a relationship, there's multi contracts with a single supplier. I think it does warrant you having specials and maybe parent company guarantees and more securities and set-off rights potentially. I think that's where you can really reasonably introduce specials for that single buy all the eggs in one basket type arrangement. With this innovative commercial delivery models, I'm probably thinking more about non-build only contracts here. Then yes, you could use 3910, but you'd have to special it quite extensively to make it into an alliance contract. So, or there's multi-party complex issues. So I think those are good reasons to special contracts. I think you should think again if you're introducing specials to correct poor behaviours. I think if you're introducing specials that are introducing to reflect what's normal practice, don't do it. I think it's unnecessary. If you personally think that your drafting is clearer, better and fairer, I would really caution you against doing that. You've had a lot of people reviewing this, not just the committee of 24, we had 2,274 extensively written comments from our public consultation process, which were reflected in this. And if you think that you can do it better, you might be right, but I'd caution you to do that. Our organisation always uses these standards in our specials. I don't think that's a good reason to keep doing it. I think you should critically evaluate for the specifics of the contract. Once again, smushing P&G, I don't know if smushing is a word, but it works. Smushing P&G into the contract, it should sit separately. Now, in this one, I've come across this one a lot. You're running through the last of the specials and you're authoring a contract and it goes, kind of seems innocuous. Why don't we just leave it there? Well, if it's innocuous, it's probably unnecessary and it probably never saved anybody, but it's a piece of red. So the whole challenge here is to reduce the amount of red in the specials. And if you don't know what the implications of your special are, then they shouldn't be there. So, yeah, personally, I think you should be asking, am I tampering? Is this really going to save me or my client? Is it really warranted? And should I seek the view of an experienced administrator, or at least engage with the person who might be buying this contract or signing this contract to understand the implications of it? So that's kind of the hypothesis. It really is saying that there's a hospital worth of savings that we could be making in New Zealand every single year through careful use of specials. And my encouragement is that you stop using specials except when they're necessary. Thank you very much. And we've got some questions, and you're welcome to ask anything that's not on the list, but if you wanted to talk about some of these, then Mike and I would be delighted to have that conversation. Does anybody have a question?
Sorry, are you going, Mark? You.
Oh, I'm holding up.
Okay. You mentioned the construction sector accord, and I don't know why it died perhaps it was a little bit politicised and had a change of government. Do you guys see possible reincarnation of that? And if you did, what might it look like?
So the question, if you're online, was is there a new version of the construction sector record emerging? I don't know is the answer. I don't see it. I'm sure there are some people in here who are closer to that than I am, but I think a lot of those initiatives, I've spoken to the Infrastructure Commission and they don't see that as their role. Maybe at Crown Infrastructure Delivery, it could pick it up, but there isn't a logical, not just a sponsor of it. It needs a champion, and I'm not sure where that's sitting at the moment.
If you had a magic wand, you make one.
If I had a magic wand, yes, I would insist that, because it's so important. There's such significant savings just through special conditions. I mean, don't get me started on standard designs. There's way more money to be made in standard designs than there is in special conditions. But that's the sort of thing that I think would do very well.
Yeah, I think sometimes procurement has too dominant a role. I'll give an example in a government agency I worked with for a number of years with Ori actually, and we had a template that was developed over the years, but procurement allowed other legal practices to tender for the work, and suddenly we got different lawyers coming in, and then we were re-engaged to do a job, and I asked for the template, but it had disappeared. They no longer had it, so they've had to gone back to one of the legal practices to recreate it. So I don't think they understood what they were actually doing, So they're not responsible for project delivery. And I totally agree that, if we could have a system where a lot of those government agencies get together for project delivery and procurement, rather than each one doing their own thing, it has to be more efficient.
But we're not going to call it the Ministry of Works.
Sorry, Brian. I think something. One's for several reasons you're never going to get rid of special conditions, but you're going back and Rob, old man in the sea talk tonight. I was asked at a conference several years ago if I could see a contract. I was on the stage with two chaps from Rapayanga. If I could see a contract without special conditions, and when I was back in Ireland in infrastructure, Treasury wrote a contract, and that was the end of it. There were no specials. That's so. If the Crown mandated here that their contract was this contract, that would be what would happen because they signed the paychecks. Yep. The reason it's not going to happen, for several reasons, is that construction in New Zealand is very macho and people like a tough contract. And that's everybody from Precinct Properties, Kiwi, all the way down to Kainga Ora. They love a tough contract. There's no point in pretending that culture doesn't exist. Second, and this is me throwing my own profession under the bus, there is a legal industry in selling specials. It's an industry. And there's a cadre of 10 to 12 law firms that will give you as tough a contract as you want. Sure. They're not the only ones. The project management industry is also driving it. It is a pro-cyclical thing. And there are project management companies that have their own special conditions. And they're often a Frankenstein's monster. Oh, I love a bit of Greenwood Road, I love a bit of Belgullion. Oh God, I really want that Chapman Trip stuff. And they're all flogging them as well. So until it's never going to go away. And as some of the project managers are driven to assist the poor contract administration practice that are out there as well, like a 5 working day time bar to challenge a type A contract instruction, which is demonstrably ordering a new pool for a school. So unfortunately, this is brilliant discussion, but it's never going to go away because the culture in the industry is there and there's too many people making money on special.
I agree with you. I think this whole thing about I've got a much worse contract than you have. It's nobody talks like that, but they think like that. Well, I can go to my board and say this is a heavily modified contract which reduces our risk, and I think that's real. My challenge to the public sector is that if you're spending taxpayers' money, pretty sure there's some taxpayers in here, you need to be more careful about that, and you should be thinking much more about the long-term health of our construction sector through special conditions as a productivity tool, not as a detractor from product two, or as a
And I promise I'll shut up after this.
as an anchor to
Because on
construction
the risk
productivity.
transfer, and of your points there, one of the, and it's pretty obvious I'm a contractor's lawyer, one of the scourges in the industry now is the PQS, and particularly at tender stage. And you're now not allowed to price the risk that's transferred to you.
No.
And so a very common change nowadays is the design development clause, that if there's a change to the design which is not material, the contractor will absorb and there'll be no variation. You then price that at tender stage, and the PQS says, no, you can't have that. So it's gone from risk dumping that you could price to risk dumping that you're not even allowed to price anymore. So it's getting even worse.
I agree with you again. It's this isn't a case of our procurement processes don't enable price to be risk to be priced fairly, because it's become the norm. You're just expected to suck it up. And the long-term consequence of that is, if you look at the number of liquidations and from the construction sector as a percentage of all liquidations in our economies, we're massively overrepresented. And it's because risks aren't being well managed and priced. So I have great sympathy with the view that contractors are taking on way more risk than they actually have the ability to manage, or the money to manage. Yep.
I think the much I think I disagree with that in particular in the context of publicly procured infrastructure projects and the alliance model. I think it's kind of nonsense, to be honest. But what I do agree with is with special conditions, the two most egregious examples I've seen over the years is one in Christchurch circa 2015, 2016, when a lot of the civic amenity packages were being put out to market. And the Christchurch City Council and other kind of semi-statutory bodies, and the special conditions were outrageous. And I always thought that was one of the catalysts for this review and the updating of the construction sector accord, because there was so much almost bad faith behaviour in Christchurch, and that really did contribute to additional costs and completely unnecessary costs. And I sort of thought that New Zealand Inc. had sort of got through that, but obviously that they haven't. And the second example was something that came across my desk just 2 days ago, and this was a triple CS, I think it was the 4th edition, 2017, for consultancy services. And we were actually, so we're a consultant business, and we were actually being asked to sign on to these terms. And it was just outrageous. There was I think 30 pages of special conditions on top of a 11-page thing, and going through them, they had no particular relevance to the scope of work. Some of them were almost certainly redundant. Others of them were, I'm not sure if you're being sort of cynical or giving the lawyers the benefit of the doubt. But are these there for negotiation purposes? This, an open thing. But given the size of our scope, it was appalling behaviour. And I'm not sure whether this is a live issue now in the consulting space as well.
It absolutely is. And I'd probably slightly temper something you said there. I don't think it's a lawyer's fault. I think it's the people who are issuing that contract's fault, if you're going to look for a fault. So once again, it's a principle. And if the principle is blindly taking legal advice or advice from their contract authors, and it's not always lawyers, I don't think they should be. I think they should be better informed for that.
But is it a case of lawyers second guessing what their client's risk profile is without the clients really understanding what their risk profile is? So in order to protect our kind of PI, we're just going to go for the almost extreme position here, just because we don't understand what our client's risk profile can be.
Yeah, you could use the same argument for design consultants, but effectively outside. Yeah.
Was there an appetite, is there a potential appetite to review the guidance notes around 3910, and particularly looking at things like the golden rules you had up there, or a drafting guidance that then we could point out and go, this is the reasonable expectation, and you've given me this?
Good question. I mean, we've been talking about this a bit. When we were finalising 3910, the last thing that was 2023, the last thing that was done was the updating of the guidelines. We had a long conversation about should there be guidelines at all. My view is that a contract is standalone and it should be able to be interpreted, and you don't need a guideline if it's well written. I wasn't successful with that view, but we've taken a pared down version of guidelines. I think there is definitely space for a good textbook, which would help practitioners understand. But personally, I don't think building the guidelines up as a productive thing. Just while I'm talking about that committee, you may know, and you may be interested to know that 3915 obviously hasn't been updated since 2003, something like that. Five. It is going to be. It will be updated quite soon. The sponsors are forming the terms of reference for that, so that will be updated. Having been through 3916, a lot of the committee members were similar to the 3910. We identified some things that we think we could have done better in 3910. So there will be an amendment to 3910 coming out, which will be updating and aligning with some of the things that we thought we did better in 3916. So those things they will sit together much more consistently. But I can't give you timeframes on that, but that's definitely a work in progress.
Just going back to that point about the guidelines and adopting that FIDIC approach,
yep.
Approaches to modification and the like.
Yeah.
Appreciate you don't want to add additional interpretive material when you're trying to, interpret a clause and what it means in a given circumstance. But it does sound like there is some merit in giving this guidance to those who are picking up the document and contemplating special conditions to say, in these circumstances, I think the idiom is Chesterton's fence. Like, don't remove a rule or don't modify a rule until you understand why it's there in the first place. Don't change it unless you've got a good reason to do so.
Yep.
And, it is then incumbent on, your lawyer to say, why it is that this needs to be changed. You have that conversation. How does this aid project execution? How is that going to blow up in my face? Because the one thing we've seen is, for all the proliferation of special conditions, we haven't got more productive. We're not getting more bang for our buck.
No.
The risk isn't being transferred effectively.
Yep.
And COVID proved to us that you can have the best drafted contract in the world and you're not going to escape project failure if you stick to it. So I think there is something there for that educative purpose.
It's whether I think that's from an educative purpose. There's absolutely there's a space there, because probably the content, a lot of what we've been talking about, I'd love to see written in a guidance to contract authors, in the same way that the guidelines are pretty much focused on contract delivery. But personally, my preference would be to have the contract standalone and then guidance books for authors and delivery. That's a personal view. Yeah. I don't know how we're going.
I was jumping back to probably what Mark made earlier, so hopefully I'm not throwing us down that rabbit hole again.
I won't speak again.
I'm just interested to pull out, there's obviously that Russ McVeigh survey about how low the uptake on 2023 has been. I saw something home from Simpson Grierson the other day where they surveyed councils and had the same, and although there was sort of more of a pull-out of it, it was that split role that seemed to be scaring people. And I guess just wondering whether that is from a productivity point of view, did it jump too far and that scared people from an uptake point of view?
Well, let's go there, because I've just got a really good slide I could demonstrate that, but I haven't got it to show that. But so in 2013 version of 3910, there are, I think I'm right, it's about 134 references to the engineer. Now, it also says that the engineer, so imagine there's 134 dots on that screen. Now, some of those are coloured yellow because that's the references where they're to be fair and impartial. And some of them are blue, and that's when they're effectively the agent of the principal. They're not obliged to be fair and impartial. If you ask everybody in this room which ones are supposed to be blue and which ones are supposed to be yellow, you'll get 30 different answers. So there was a very poor understanding, and it was a drafting issue. The contract did not say, in this capacity, the engineer is fair and impartial, and for this one, it's agent of the principal. So that's one major issue. So we split that very clearly. So it's now really clear when you're being fair and impartial, and it's very clear when you're agent to the principal effectively, or not quite agent, but you're contract administrator. Further complicated by this idea of the engineer being able to delegate roles to generally a junior party, which is an engineer's rep. So of that 134, which we're going to disagree about what colour they are, there's a subsection of those which you're saying, well, you can do those bits, and that person is generally more junior and understands less about when they're going to be fair and impartial agent to the principal and what that really means. So that was the essence of a lot of the problems with 3910 and the role of the engineer in the engineer's contract. So engineer and the engineer's rep. So by identifying the IC and the CA, which can be the same person, they're just roles. You can be a dad today and a work colleague later on today. We're used to wearing different hats. It's not that hard. But that distinction and clarification of the roles. It was a big step. It was an important step. And I think that the reason people aren't adopting it for that reason is because the industry is used to operating a different way. And it means change. And people have to change the way that they think and behave in order to comply with the new standard. So it's change resistance. It's not lack of clarity, my view.
Yeah, no, that's I like that. Any other questions? Thanks, David. I tend to agree, and I think actually the split that has gone in there is not different to that split that said only the engineer can do these certain things, right? But yeah, for whatever reason, it's just interesting seeing these surveys that suggest there's some sort of fear or hesitation when, like you say, it can be the same person with different hats, but it just doesn't have that expectation. If there's no online questions, George, I'm going to just check that. That's all good. I really want to say thank you, David. Thank you, Mike. Tonight's been a really interesting discussion, crossing a lot of areas. I think there's probably a lot of agreement from definitely the people I've talked to previously about the role of special conditions and how contracts should be administered in the room. I almost wanted to leap into that concurrent delay point that Mike and Mark sort of touched on. But it's not going down that route. But it is, I think the practice and how you deliver projects needs to come much back more to that how and the delivery focus, and special conditions and contracts really need to be driven around how that is. This is a discussion that's been talked about by a lot of people in the Society of Construction Law and the industry for a while. So thank you, David and Mike, for bringing it to us. Yeah, I've definitely found it good. If there is an online voucher, I understand that, to say thank you for your nationwide tour. But if you guys can join me in thanking them tonight, and thanks everyone online for dialing in. We'll see. Thank you.